our opening keynote speaker, Ashley.
More to say. Merci. Good morning, everyone. Raise your hand if in your Science Center journey you have done public presentations. Yeah. How much fun is it when you say good morning to a room that doesn't reply back? Let's try again. Good morning, everyone. I know you can. It's just you need to get there. Okay, bonjour tout le monde. It is really an honor to be representing Science North today as the presenting sponsor of what I know is going to be an amazing keynote session. Before I get started, can I get a show of hands if you have visited Science North? Okay, not bad. That's great. It's good to get context in the room of how much I need to tell you. I won't tell you that much because I'm between you and something really awesome, so I'll keep it short. But just to give you some context, if you're not familiar, both of our physical science centers, Science North and Dynamic Earth, are located in Sudbury, Ontario. And in addition to our two science centers, we also service an area that is 800,000 square kilometers, or 185 Torontos, through our outreach programs. So we have some of our outreach staff in the room with us today, and they do an incredible job, and I know many of your organizations do outreach as well, so you know the particular challenges of delivering to rural communities. We're very proud of the fact that we serve an area that large. We are an organization that is deeply committed to equitable access to science for all, and that means that even if you live 26 hours away from our science centers, we're going to make sure that you get some kind of science education experience, and that really is a driver for us. This year's CASC conference is all about connections. Connections to each other, which we're doing here, connections to our communities, and connections to the land. Notre congrès cette année est axé sur les liens entre nous, avec nos communautés, et avec la Terre. To ensure a strong connection to each other, at Science North, our team strives to cultivate an equitable, diverse, inclusive, and accessible culture, both internally facing with each other as colleagues and also externally for our visitors. By fostering inclusive environments and actively changing systems, policies, and practices, we're working to ensure that everyone feels welcome and valued both within our walls and beyond. In connecting within our communities, we envision a future where reconciliation is not just a buzzword, but a lived reality. We are committed to fostering relationships with Indigenous peoples and First Nations communities built on mutual respect, trust, and dialogue. This commitment extends to recognizing and integrating past, present, and future Indigenous perspectives in all facets of our work. But our commitment doesn't stop there. Environmental sustainability lies at the heart of the work that we do. Of course, like most of you, we share exhibits and educational experiences centered on climate change, clean growth, sustainability with our visitors. In fact, we hope that you'll take advantage tonight when you visit the amazing Saskatchewan Science Centre to visit Our Climate Quest exhibition. This 6,000 square foot traveling exhibition has been traveling across the country as part of the Government of Canada's EDF project. And thank you, many of those of you in the room have hosted the exhibition, and I hope that many of you will following this. Now, beyond our visitor-facing initiatives, we're also steadfast in our mission at Science North to implement sustainable practices against all our operations, conserving natural resources and protecting ecosystems for future generations. In fact, we were the first science center to sign on for Canada's Net Zero Challenge, which encourages businesses to develop and implement credible and effective plans to transition their facilities and operations to net zero emissions by 2050. Now, enough from me. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from a remarkable individual whose passion, dedication, and vision intersect with many of the themes that we'll be focused on during our time together this week. Our speaker is a champion for community, sustainability, and inclusion. And he's helping to shape the future of environmental activism and social change. He's amplifying youth voices and pushing for action on a global scale. In him, we see a beacon of hope for our future. No pressure. And he's also a reminder that age is just a number when it comes to making a difference. Now, this is going to be an awesome conversation moderated by the fabulous Jennifer Punch. And I have your bio here too, Jennifer, and I get the honor of saying that one. Jennifer gets the honor of actually introducing the speaker. I'm just building up anticipation. So Jennifer joined the Discovery Center in Halifax as Director of Marketing and Sales in 2016 before the launch of their new facility, which is fabulous. She found herself, like many of us, immediately at home in the Science Center community and was thrilled to welcome CASC members to Halifax for the 2019 CASC conference, which was a great one. Advancing to the Chief Operating Officer role in 2023, Jennifer is responsible for the diverse business functions and revenue drivers of the organization, a critical role, and ensuring efficient operations to its maximum potential. A 25-year, no, not possible, no. She started when she was 5. Veteran in marketing and communications, Jennifer holds a degree in public relations from Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax. Everyone, she is going to help moderate an incredible conversation this morning that we are all privileged to experience. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Jennifer Punch.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. The 25-year-old veteran needs the glasses. I had the pleasure of meeting my guest in our work with Gen Action through the Environment and Climate Change Canada. And yesterday we bonded in Muwasan over a tick. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I want to introduce you to Abhay Singh Sachal. He's a 22-year-old Canadian whose research and work resides at the intersection of climate change, ecoanxiety, mental health, and spirituality. He's the founder of Break the Divide, a not-for-profit organization based on the principles of environmentalism, sustainability, and reconciliation that focuses on fostering empathy and understanding to inspire local action in projects and communities. Abhay is one of 10 advisors in the inaugural Environment and Climate Change Canada Youth Council, and he currently works as the Youth Advisory Board Chair at the Mental Health Climate Change Alliance. He's currently a student at the University of Regina, and he's studying his Master's of Education in Education Psychology. In his spare time, he's a public speaker on environmental and climate change issues, and a hockey player, we're told, and a pianist. Maybe we'll get a briefing on those skills a little later. Abhay, I'd welcome you to the stage. I think we're live.
We're good.
Testing.
Yeah.
How do we sound? Well, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be here. Hi, everyone.
As Ashley said, you guys can do better than that. Try it again.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I know I mixed that one up too, so that's like a 90% there.
They'll warm up. I wanted to start by really just getting to know you and your journey. You're 22 years old, but as Ashley said, that's not it's not the marker of your personality or your growth. But your resume is growing. Your passion for this topic in environmental sustainability is truly inspirational, not just to youth, who I know you work a lot with, but to certainly everyone in this room and beyond. And we're just curious, what sparked that journey for you as an environmental advocate?
Absolutely. I grew up in BC. I know they're like, raise your hand if you're from BC. Let's get a cheer. And I grew up, I remember going to Science World when I was young, for example. I knew I had to mention that to this crowd. Growing up in BC, I mean, I remember just my earliest memories of being with the environment, being, by the water on one side, seeing the mountains constantly, and that's something that I miss in the prairies. And just being in beautiful forests. And I remember these early memories, like my dad would wake me up early up at like 6 a.m. some days. I had hockey practice some days at like 5. On the way back from hockey, we'd stop at these like really beautiful parks, and it would be raining, kind of like yesterday's weather. And I just remember like breathing in that fresh air. And so that connection with the environment for me, I think, was fostered really young just because I had those experiences. When I was in elementary school and high school, we started doing presentations about climate change to other elementary school students and high school students. And that was just a very cool process for me as well. I'd say, like, to be able to build many of those skills in communication around climate change and learning about that topic of climate change so young. Like, I remember learning about polar bears, learning about issues for the future, like all these big topics. And so when I was 14 years old, I had this incredible opportunity to travel to the Arctic through the Students on Ice Foundation. And the Students on Ice Foundation has been doing expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctic for many, many years now. I was 14 and I was really fortunate to get a scholarship to go on this expedition. And I was with 200 people from around the world. These were scientists, historians, musicians, all sorts of people. And I remember being in the Arctic and seeing climate change firsthand. Like, I saw polar bears, which I had learned about, but it wasn't the polar bears that struck me. It was learning about the experiences of my new Inuit friends that were from the Arctic and learning from them about how climate change has been impacting their communities, and not as something that's for the future, but something that has been impacting their communities for the past decades. That was, and it's one of those things where it's like, I think the thing that was shocking to me was the fact that I didn't already know the experiences of climate change in the North. You know, why didn't my education system tell me about experiences of climate change already happening in this country? And seeing climate change and being able to understand it sort of at that very physical level, but then that personal level, those connections that started to be built, I think that was incredibly powerful. And coming back home, I was really excited and I wanted to do more. And I think that's really when that journey began to like move forward, yeah.
You know, as Science Center educators and facilitators, I mean, we couldn't be more excited to hear what an impact that experience was on you, not unlike impact experience that they might, you know, see at some of our facilities. Your work and passion is garnering a lot of attention, and some for those who are looking for guidance on how to inspire youth to climate action. Can you tell us a bit about your projects or your experiences with the Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Mental Health Climate Alliance?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to be a part of quite a few different youth councils, and now I'm leading my own youth council in this role that I have at this organization called the Mental Health Climate Change Alliance, looking at this intersection of mental health and climate change. And in many of the youth councils that I've been a part of, it's been such an interesting journey just to see what meaningful youth engagement looks like. And so for me, I'd say, I know that in many youth councils that I've been a part of, I've struggled the most, and the other youth around me have struggled the most when we've had very broad mandates. One youth council that I won't name, but it was a very high-profile youth council where it was me and 20 people from around the world, and we were told that we would be given access to resources, access to decision makers, access to actually make a change. And that was really exciting. It was around environmental issues. And when we started the youth council, we spent 6 months building out a terms of reference. And after those 6 months, then the expectation was, okay, now you youth know what to do, which we didn't. Go take action. And so again, we didn't know the confines of what was possible. We didn't know what was in our scope. We didn't have access to resources. We were a volunteer youth council, right? At so many levels. I mean, already we can all see that there's an issue there in terms of just telling a bunch of youth who don't really even have a stake in the decisions that you're making to then go out and make change on your organization's behalf. And so that was one youth council experience that I think really has shown me what meaningful youth engagement looks like. And now with the Environment and Climate Change Canada Youth Council that I've been a part of, it's been the first ever iteration of this council. And at a federal level, I think it's been very just great to see this passion and initiative from the federal government. And Minister Guilbeault, for example, has really been committed to engaging with us as a youth council, wanting youth voices and youth perspectives. And I think that's so important for whatever programming, whatever policies we are creating. I'd say with this youth council, there's definitely been ups and downs in terms of working within government. And I know many people here, I was listening to a conversation yesterday just about the trials and tribulations of getting funding, right? Those are things that I've been able to learn about. And one of the big issues that has come up in the Environment and Climate Change Canada Youth Council has just been this question of jurisdiction. So as a youth council, if we're lobbying the federal government and we're in these consultation meetings and asking for fossil fuel production to be limited, the response that we get is, that's actually provincial jurisdiction. And so the federal government can enact like an emissions cap, which has been done, and there's so much other work to do. But on this point of fossil fuel production, it's like, I have felt very helpless. It's like, okay, well, what do I do? And I have this access. And so I think the meaningful youth engagement in this federal youth council has been very powerful in that they've been meeting with us very consistently, asking us very specific questions about specific policies, whether that's on environmental justice and environmental racism, or on Canada's net zero plan, or planning for the next COP that's going on in Azerbaijan, right? Like those sort of specific priorities is really important. I think a big part of all of that, though, is preparing youth well enough in advance so that they can engage in consultation, so they have the background info to then be able to answer the questions that you're asking. Otherwise, you're, again, putting all this additional labor and work on youth that want to succeed, but when they don't, because they're not set up for the right conditions, then they're going to feel bad, they're going to feel like they're not valuable, and it creates this entire cycle of youth feeling not valuable, the people that are running youth consultations thinking that they're not really getting what they wanted. And so I guess to put this all together, in my work that I've now been leading at the Mental Health Climate Change Alliance, I've been a chair of a youth advisory board, and I've been very fortunate to be able to put together a youth advisory board of 7 young Canadians from across the country. And in this youth advisory board, like, one of the first questions I asked was, do you all want this to be a consultative body or an action body? Because those are very different things, and it's difficult to do both at the same time. With an action body, you want to be providing youth with resources and like mentorship to take the action that they want to take. I don't know if that's an advisory board anymore, but it's definitely giving youth access to resources and opportunities. On the other front, like a consultative body is exactly what it sounds like. You're consulting with youth. And so, long story short, with this youth advisory board, I'd say that we've really been intentional about letting the youth know that since the Mental Health Climate Change Alliance is a small organization, if we are engaging with them, exactly like what they say will be implemented in programming, in resources, and policy. And I think that's just one of the little things, but it's a huge difference when it comes to actually engaging in conversation and making people feel heard, welcome, but again, also providing value back to the organization. So a bit of a long story on like this process of engaging with multiple different youth councils and just some of the like little things that really add up.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's incredible that you're not only making an impact with these groups, but also being patient for them to develop the parameters for you then to go on and make an impact. That's a lot of pressure. It's incredible work that you're doing, and of course, you're still in school. You're at the University of Regina here in Saskatchewan, and with all your spare time, you found time to develop a not-for-profit, your own not-for-profit called Break the Divide. And I'm told that it fosters connection and empathy among youth to inspire action in the areas of environmentalism, sustainability, and reconciliation. And so I just wonder if you could expand on that a little bit. Tell me about the mission, some of the services, and what's the impact to date? What's been the results so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I left everyone on this cliffhanger of a story where I came back from this Arctic expedition at 14, and I was really excited. I started Break the Divide with a team of youth around me, a high school teacher that mentored me, and again, there we see that like that support that I got at that young age was really impactful for me. I started Break the Divide as a means of connecting young people across the country to talk about local impacts of climate change. And back in 2016, 2017, when we were starting, like we were using Zoom calls way before it was cool to use Zoom. I remember we were using Skype. Does anyone know what Skype is? Yeah. Like we were using every single thing that exists. And when we started, the goal was actually very simple. It was to break down divisions between my high school in Delta, British Columbia, with a school in Inuvik in the Northwest Territories, so that we could better understand perspectives of communities in the North. And we could also build relationships, like a two-way street of understanding and knowing about one another. And in that process, break down the divide between communities and the divide on multiple levels.
So this was an initiative you started in high school?
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't know if anyone heard that. Jennifer said...
this is an initiative he started in high school.
Yeah, and it was interesting, just again, I think this is what I also tell youth a lot, that it's very okay and actually best to start small. Like again, we were doing video calls between communities, which like all of us probably hop on like 10 video calls every day now. And so when I look back at that, it felt like a very small project. Over the years, what Break the Divide has grown to has been a project where we have been connecting communities across the country to engage in these conversations about climate change and mental health, the emotional side of climate change, which I know we'll dive into in a bit here. But on that emotional side, young people have very valid emotions about the climate crisis, whether it's anxiety, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of grief. Like these are really important emotions to acknowledge, to create space for. At Break the Divide, what we've been doing has been connecting young people from different communities in BC and Ontario, New Brunswick and Alberta, connecting them about local impacts of climate change on communities. And through that process, what we see happen is young people talk about their own emotions about climate change, but they also talk about their own communities and what their communities have to offer in terms of climate change, in terms of climate action. And that process of learning from other communities we've seen is incredibly powerful, where you feel less alone, but you also see what else is out there and you're excited by those possibilities. And so at Break the Divide, we're really excited to be able to connect these communities across the country. Like we're expanding and we're launching a new cycle of our program in September to connect over 30 schools across the country now with each other. And we'd love to, again, work with science centers, for example, to engage in local communities. Another big program that we have is facilitating sort of climate emotion circles, like open spaces where anyone can come in and talk about their feelings about the climate crisis without necessarily having to talk about solutions. I know that can often feel very burdensome. And so creating those spaces to talk about climate change, how it makes you feel, and then bring in your own community, your identity, your background to these discussions. I think one thing that I've really realized through this entire journey is that every community, and community is not just geographic, community can be formed in so many different ways, whether that's by shared identity, shared interests, a community of science educators, a community of people that work in the nonprofit sector, a community of, a community of like Canucks fans, and the Canucks are gonna beat the Oilers tonight. Like, yes. Now we're talking, yeah. And those are communities that exist out there. And within every community, we have influences, we have our own spheres of influence, but we also have shared norms. Like there is a community here that understands what it means to engage with young people. And someone from outside of this community might not be able to relate in that exact same way. And so with communities comes a whole great deal of knowledge that can then be shared.
So it sounds like a great support system, but also great connection and sets people up really to make change and to get rid of some of those barriers perhaps. My next question is really kind of starts to involve the work that we all do, and as we all work to inspire climate action amongst today's youth, one of the side effects is this notion of eco-anxiety you've mentioned already. And how do you see eco-anxiety showing up in young people, and how can we use eco-anxiety or support youth in their eco-anxiety and eco-fear as a tool to inspire change?
Yeah, I'd actually love to start by just asking everyone in the audience here, how does climate change make you feel? Like raise of hands or anyone can just jump in. How does climate change make you feel?
Maybe just single words.
Afraid?
Afraid. Overwhelmed.
Nervous, overwhelmed, hopeless.
Angry. Anxious. Frustrated.
Anyone else? Disappointed, sad?
Disappointed.
Yeah.
Whew.
I mean, these are heavy emotions, yeah? Okay, sorry, I thought I saw a hand back there. When we hear these emotions, this is the emotional toll on us as often, again, adults, people that have the emotional regulation skills, in large part to understand sort of your impact, your influence, and to be in actual careers where you can make a difference. I know working with young people, we see so many emotions around climate change. And these emotions are a bit more complicated than eco-anxiety. Eco-anxiety just, again, often refers to this idea that young people, and people in general, are anxious about climate change, are anxious about the situation right now, about the future. But when we break it down, climate emotions is actually a very complex field that involves many different diverse emotions. And so I think the first step in supporting young people with these emotions is first acknowledging them, creating a space to talk about some of the more complex emotions, like feelings of guilt, feelings of helplessness, like, hey, I don't know what to do. I was at a conference in Vancouver last week, and this is exactly what I heard. Like, yeah, you're telling me I can take action, but I know that corporations and politicians have the biggest influence. I know that it feels like there's not much I can do. And I know that, like, I'm also contributing to the climate crisis. And so then there's feelings of hypocrisy, for example, that come up. I think when we get into some of those more complex emotions too, like feelings of privilege and guilt, or feeling privileged and then feeling guilty about feeling emotions, like that's where creating this space for youth to talk about their emotions is incredibly important. And I think a big part of that is then helping young people understand what these emotions are. So who here has heard of the term solastalgia? I know a few people have. So solastalgia refers to this, it sounds a bit like nostalgia. Solastalgia refers to this idea of place-based homesickness, where you're still in your physical home location, but it no longer feels like home because the environment has changed so much. And so now, does anyone feel like they've experienced solastalgia before? That your environment has changed so much that it no longer feels like home. So we see quite a few hands raised now. And what I found just from working with young people, but working with everyone actually, is giving a name to those emotions helps you identify it and helps you relate to other people that also feel that way. That you're no longer alone in that emotion, but now that you recognize the emotion, you can take some action around it. And so giving young people the space to name these emotions, to acknowledge them, and then to connect with others around them is incredibly powerful. And it helps with some of these bigger feelings of existential dread or hopelessness for the future that we often hear about. And I think one of the biggest things I see is that, like, especially in adult education spaces or adult spaces working with young people in the environment, is like, okay, so we see that young people are anxious. How do we treat that? How do we support that? But I want to remind everyone here that the goal isn't to pathologize eco-anxiety. It's not to say eco-anxiety is a disorder that we need to treat. Eco-anxiety, these emotions that we feel about the climate crisis, are a sign that we're alive. It's a sign that we're living, that we're breathing, and that we care, that we connect to other people, and we care about our environment. And it would actually be a bigger sign if we didn't care. And so creating that space and allowing that opportunity to understand and talk about, like, this existential dread. I'll just tell one quick story, actually, working with young people across the country. A 13-year-old in Northern Ontario once told me that she was really struggling with eco-anxiety. And she told me that she didn't know what to do. And again, my approach is always, okay, well, let's understand this level of anxiety. Is it like an appropriate response to the climate crisis? Which in most cases it often is. But then she told me that she had stopped eating and she had developed an eating disorder because she was so worried about her carbon footprint and her output into the environment. And so now we have a whole generation of young people that are so worried about their individual impacts and their actions, and they feel burdened by, again, the climate crisis. So I think on multiple levels here, we need to reframe the stories that we tell young people that, yes, this is a crisis, but we're not heading towards a dead end. We're not heading towards, like, a future crisis if we take action. And what we can do is build around hope. So I think on multiple levels, creating supports for young people to transform some of these more negative emotions into positive action. And that can happen through community and connectedness, but also just get support for many of these negative emotions. Sometimes that means more mental health supports, access to therapy, access to psychologists, access to more mental health supports and resources, and access to community. And that's something that I'm really interested in exploring more. Like, what does using science centers as a place of community building look like?
Good segue. This is my last question before I turn it over to you guys. So please jot down some questions that you can either pass my way, or if you're brave enough to stand up and ask Abhay, we're open to some questions at the end. So here in a room filled with science communicators and science engagement professionals, what's your advice for how to address eco-anxiety and inspire climate hope, particularly in a diverse, diverse communities among youth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, that's one of the big questions. Like, what do we do about this? There is a mental health crisis that's separated from the climate crisis that we see in young people. We see a climate crisis, but we also see now this intersecting issue. And so I think it's, again, one of the most pressing issues of our time, actually, because as we think about communities across the country, whether it's people in BC that have been evacuated because of wildfires, people that have lost everything, people that have been impacted by flooding, like we see the impacts of the climate crisis in Canada today, and young people feel that deeply. Young people experience it. And so I think one of the things that we can do to meet the mental health demands of the climate crisis is reframe what mental health and emotional care looks like. And what I mean by that is recognizing that like our existing mental health care system can't actually scale to meet the demands of the climate crisis. If every young person is anxious or has some sort of emotion about the climate crisis, also recognizing that emotions like, or feelings like apathy, feelings like anger, polarization, or just not caring, I'm sure we always see students that sometimes just don't care about climate change. Like that's a big issue. And so we can often understand apathy or carelessness as emotional responses to the climate crisis. So every young person has some sort of emotional response to the climate crisis. I think that question is then like, can our existing system meet those demands? And my answer is no. We can't just give a therapist to every single person struggling. That doesn't even tackle the bigger systemic issue that's causing the anxiety. And so I think what that means is then, how do we transform our system of care, of mental health care, to prioritize community well-being, to prioritize wellness? And so not only look at the climate action achieved as a result of a youth action project, for example, but how do they feel before and after a program? How do they feel more connected to their community? Do they actually understand diverse knowledges, for example? Even this idea that like we need to be in rising spirits and continuing to go about transformation in the world and questioning some of the norms that we already see as like what is appropriate. For example, like, you know, in the Western knowledge that we exist in, the Western culture, like urgency culture is often so prioritized. This idea that we need to be on the point, we need to be moving forward critically at every second. But what if we engage with other forms of knowledge? I know we talked a lot about indigenous knowledges yesterday in relation with the land, even just the idea that like we can slow down, we can afford to, we can relate to one another. And so I think the really big role of science centers and educators and everyone in the space is to really push for active hope, to push for this idea that, you know, we're not just hoping for the sake of hoping for the future, but we have a stake in this and we can create the future that we want. So building towards something positive, I think that's incredibly critical. I'd also say that youth connecting around science and things that are fun can be incredibly exciting. And I think the last thing is really the importance of amplifying diverse youth perspectives. We talked about the best ways to engage with youth and make youth feel like they have a say and actually implement what young people are saying. I think that next step is really, how do we go beyond that and actually put youth in positions where they can then make change? And make change, I think, at this emotional front, and use your climate emotions that you're having to like actually influence the decisions that you're making, to actually influence the organization's decision making. I'll end with just one thing that I often think about. In my own spiritual worldview of coming from the Sikh faith, there's this idea called Chardi Kala, which refers to being in rising spirits. It refers to this idea that regardless of how bad things are, you continue to fight, you continue to do your best, and you do it with other people. I spent some time in Fiji a few summers ago, and I saw a really similar thing where even communities that are impacted by the climate crisis directly right now, when natural disasters strike, the first thing that they do is come together, and the strongest in the community, like physically strongest in this context, will go find the most vulnerable, often the elders, and they will carry them to higher ground when flooding hits. Like that's the first thing that comes to mind. And so I just shared examples of two diverse ways of knowing. We have Sikh Canadians across the country. There are Fijian Canadians. What about other diverse ways of knowing that come from your community or other cultures or other different people that are in this country and have been in this country for decades? And from indigenous communities that we are connected to that have been on the land that we now call Canada since time immemorial. Diversifying our knowledge to address the climate crisis is critical because we can't simply replicate the same ways of existing. So I think my ask to everyone here actually is, how can we envision science centers as places of community where we can care for one another, where young people can address their emotions about the climate crisis, but then engage in this collective community sort of care that then leads to broader climate action. I think that's the thing that I'm really excited about exploring with everyone here.
I love this term you said, active hope. That's one of my new learnings for the day. Isn't he awesome? Claire, do we still have time for a few questions? Awesome. I would love to hear from any of you who want to pass me a note or raise your hand if you have questions for Abhay. Yes.
Oh yeah, that would probably help. Did it help?
You too have the power.
So you started your organization at 14. So you've probably seen incredible changes in connectivity, particularly with far northern communities over the last 8 years. I know like satellite internet has improved so much so that you can actually use Zoom properly now. How has your partnership with that far northern school developed over the years as connectivity has improved?
That's a really great question. Connectivity is one of those big issues that we have faced from the very get-go, and it's been something that we've had to think about to adapt programs constantly when we were connecting with schools in the north. Like, internet connectivity was a big issue, and figuring that out. So over the years, I've seen so many changes just in the ways that we engage with schools. I know that teachers are so overburdened. Teachers are busy, and even just adapting our program so it's less of a burden on teachers to like actually take part in, that's been big. And honestly, I would actually say that I think I have more to learn from everyone in this room on this topic in terms of what are the best ways to engage with schools and teachers and communities. Like, I know that there have been so many changes in the ways that like schools are just connected with each other already. And so I think at Break the Divide, one of the ways that I've adapted the way that I think about our programming is really focusing on this community knowledge piece. That yes, we're bringing in this idea of emotions to the classroom around climate change, but what are the diverse ways of knowing and community knowledge perspectives that we can then share and get students to reflect on themselves, and like getting our programming to sort of reflect that and that focus.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Abhay, Jennifer. Thank you so much for the chat right now. My name is Vidya. I am a materials scientist, a STEM advocate, and a mom of a 3-year-old. So my question is more on the measures, like what do you think are the measures that today's education system could consider in raising this awareness in kids? Like kids who go to daycare aged between 3 and 5, kids who just enter elementary school, because those formative years of development play a crucial role in terms of the child developing and just being aware of their surroundings. And as a parent, like in the last 1 year, I've learned so much from my 2-year-old, 3-year-old, as he brings stories back from daycare and tells me, Mama, this is like this, this is like this. And I know 50 dinosaur names, and I never thought I'd know that in my life. So I've learned so much from my kid, and I'm just thinking they could be an excellent, excellent communicators of science, even if they don't know what science is. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So an organization called the Climate Psychology Alliance has this excellent guide for educators on climate emotions. I think it's called the Educator's Guide to Climate Emotions, and I'm happy to share it with others later. You can also Google it. And what this guide sort of goes through is this idea that the research shows that we have sort of underestimated young people's abilities to understand and conceptualize climate change and then take action at younger ages. We've underestimated that. And so the ways but there's also a lot of intention that we need to engage in to teach climate change to young children in a way that doesn't traumatize them, that doesn't create this sort of freeze response of anxiety and helplessness and overwhelm. And I fear that we often do end up putting young people into this freeze response around climate change because of the emphasis on numbers, on the future, on how doomed we are. And it's not just science education in classrooms, it's also popular media and social media. I know the Instagram algorithms that I'm scrolling through are not good for my mental health. And when it comes to climate change in particular, like when kids are 13, 14, and all they're seeing is, okay, well, this country did this thing that's bad, this country hasn't changed this yet, this community isn't advancing, that's where I think we see a lot of the doom and gloom about the future. And again, the situation is dire. We need immediate action now, and we need it on multiple scales. But I think in terms of the ways that we develop children, what the research really shows is that from sort of the younger ages of 2 to 6, like at those stages, actually, that's where connection to nature is one of the most important things that we can like foster in a child. And having that relationship with nature and understanding that nature is not something that's an automatic, but it takes like preservation, it takes action, it takes intention to preserve nature. Even just that learning at a young age can then lead to learnings from ages 7 to 10 around understanding what climate change is, understanding that it is human cause, and then from 11 onwards, that's really where that action piece can become a critical part of climate communication, that yes, this is the crisis, but this is also what's been going on, and here's how you can contribute to that. And not focusing on those individual, like, you know, you can recycle, you can walk instead of driving, you can bike. Like those things, yes, are important, and I think those are easy ways to get students to like catch on to this initially. But I think we need to adapt that for the ways that the landscape has changed. Like now, young people will think of that and hear that in schools, but then will go home and see on the news and see on their phones that the situation is so much worse. And so that action no longer meets the scale of the demands of climate action that they perceive. And so changing the ways that maybe it's like writing a letter to your city councilor around a toxic waste site that's creating a lot of environmental injustice. Maybe that's the action. And in a sense, that's something that can be done in a classroom that's smaller than like, you know, biking to school every single day for the rest of your life. That's a huge change. But is it possible that that has a better emotional impact on the child? I think really exploring some of these things and breaking it down on what are the individual emotional milestones, the developmental milestones, and those climate action related milestones that we can achieve over a lifetime. I think that's a really great question.
I think we have time for one more in the back.
I thought you were pointing to someone else. Hi, I'm Evie. I'm also a climate educator who focuses a lot on climate optimism and the intersection of mental health and climate. So I really, really appreciated your presentation, and I took so many notes, and I'm so excited to take these learnings with me. I'm wondering how you create a sense of safety when it comes to sharing climate emotions. I know that due to pressures, social pressures, especially for young people, it can be hard to share emotions for some people. Yeah. And then it can be, some people may be oversharing because they've never had a chance to share these emotions. So I wonder if you work with therapists or work with experts, like how do you create a sense of safety?
That's a really great question. Yeah, safety is such a big thing. So I think on two levels, like one thing has been, this is a bit more broad, but in order for people to feel safe enough to share, it needs to be a space where they feel safe, like period. And I think creating a space where people can be vulnerable, where they can trust one another. And so I think working with existing communities of trust can be important. So if you have a community of youth that have been visiting your science center for weeks on weeks, maybe it's not the first time that you see them that you say, how do you feel about this issue? But it's 3 or 4 weeks in, and when you have specific questions that are related to like what you've seen. So how did you feel about this program that we did, or did you hear the news about XYZ? How does that feel? I think that can often break it down in a way where it's like, oh, like I'm sad about this, instead of like, here are all of my emotions I've ever experienced ever about every problem, because you do that. I think the other thing is just like, actually at a technological level, instead of like opening it up for, hey, does anyone want to share about these emotions, which is important, actually using technology tools like Padlet or like a Kahoot or things like that, where
tools they're comfortable with.
Exactly, tools that young people are comfortable with, because again, we have seen this time and time again. Oftentimes, many students, but I'm seeing more students don't want to speak up, and I think it is in large part because of that lack of sort of feeling of safety. And so I think that's something that we build over time, and starting with like a technological, okay, I'm sharing my screen, here's what like all of your responses are, and they're anonymous. Next time, maybe, once those emotional responses are validated, the next time maybe people will feel like they can share out loud.
Fantastic. Abhay is here for the conference, and I know would love to hear the rest of your questions casually. And as he said, he's here to learn from us too. So
Do we have time to take that one question in the back?
Sure, yes, please. Please, I do feel bad.
Thanks, Abhay, for looking out. I appreciate that. So I just wanted to ask a quick question. You said that one of your first connections with nature was when you essentially were forest bathing before the term was officially called forest bathing. And as important as it is to identify the anxiousness of our climate crisis, what are some other like climate action strategies that you would recommend to help youth connect with nature for themselves, or even use it as a form of so like quote unquote therapy for youth in terms of eco-anxiety, especially for communities, BC is very lucky, I got to visit it myself, but especially for communities with different environments or different ecosystems or even urban ecosystems.
Yeah, and I think your question actually makes a really great point on what action can look like. We can put multiple of these things together where we get young people taking climate action, connecting with community, and so not being alone in doing it, doing something positive for their mental health, and connecting with nature. And actually many of these things bleed into each other. Like when you are out on the land or when you're out in an environmental way to connect with nature, you're also probably not alone. And if you can build in ways for people to get to know one another, feel less alone, that's incredibly powerful there. And so in terms of your question on what it looks like to actually connect with nature, I think that's a really great question. That's something that my thesis work at the University of Regina is looking at right now. And I think it's actually exploring different ways on what connectedness to nature looks like. It doesn't actually necessarily need to be physically out in nature. And again, I know everyone here must know this in terms of you can be inside a physical building of a science center, but feel in awe of the beauty of nature and the beauty of the natural world. You can feel the enormity of the climate crisis, even if you're on your computer. And so really using digital technology, storytelling, and deeper ideas of, I think, the different cultural and diverse knowledge perspectives, those can also be a way to get people to understand what their relationship with not just nature and the environment, but the entire world and other people looks like. How do young people relate to other people? Do they see them as connected to themselves or separate? And even just exploring that and parsing out what that looks like from the perspective of the individual young person is really powerful. And so I know we're just at time here. Thank you everyone so much for listening. Sorry, I'm taking away Jennifer's closing.
That's okay. No, just please join me in thanking Abhay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, I could have listened to this conversation go on for another hour. How interesting, and so many actions that we must reflect on in terms of the role of educators and setting secure, safe places for youth to speak and exchange and have a safe environment around them. Diversifying our knowledge. I heard so many key message from this conversation. I hope that you got as much out of it as I did. So thank you again, Jennifer and Abhay, for this great fireside chat. We have a really interesting portion of the program coming up. I'm really excited about this one too, because number one, you're getting an early lunch. You just had breakfast, but you're getting an early lunch. We're going to invite you to grab your lunch shortly and join us back in this room for the Future of Industry Roundtable Lunch. This is generously sponsored by the Government of Saskatchewan. So this unique opportunity will allow some of the industry leaders and our conference sponsors to share their key learnings and future trends as thought leaders in the STEM engagement sector. After a series of lightning talks, think like TED Talks, 7 minutes or so, about STEM engagement, everyone will have the opportunity to explore topics more deeply at table talk discussions with the presenters and your colleagues. On va vous inviter à aller chercher votre repas, votre dîner, puis prendre une place à la table de votre choix à votre retour, et vous ne voulez absolument rien manquer. So go ahead and grab your lunch, stretch your legs, and enjoy a few minutes here. We want you back in here in 20 minutes, seated at a table of interest, and you will not want to miss any of these presentations. Thank you for your attention this morning.